Hello friends, welcome back to the channel Anthropology Think Tank for UPSC CSU. Today we'll start our lecture 3, which again deals with the branches of anthropology. This is the part 2 for this topic 1.3, the branches of anthropology. So again, like we have studied the definitions earlier also, we'll keep the very similar pattern based on the approaches of anthropology only. That is, it is a holistic study of evolution and variation of human languages in time and space. That is, it studies all the aspects of language, then it studies the evolution and the differences, that is the variation in the languages in both time and space. So like the six approaches we had earlier studied in anthropology, that it studies evolution, comparative approach, holistic approach. So that only we are applying to this definition. There's nothing new. If you just remember those 6 points, we can continue with your definition, and by remembering the things least, there's no rote learning. So then the branches of linguistic anthropology, these include historical linguistics. So historical itself means that you have to study the origin and the development and the divergence of languages. So origin is how the language evolved. Development is how it develops in time, how what are the changes that come into the language. And divergence is mean that how the languages of different cultures start diverging from each other. Then we have sociolinguistics. So sociolinguistics studies the language use in the socio-cultural context. We'll be taking up with this in the next slide itself. And then we have structural linguists, which deals with the construction of language. That is, there are certain phonemic, syntactic, and there are some rules that are used for construction of languages. So that is studied in the structural linguistics. So now we will take up in detail what is the scope of linguistic anthropology. So if you see the syllabus and you see the unit 7, which deals with the language part, then you can understand how the syllabus itself tells about what are the scope of linguistic anthropology. So the first is it studies the evolution, that is the origin, and change, that is when it evolves or it gets originated, and then how it changes with time due to, again this is anthropology, so studies biocultural factors. See, I'm telling you three important ways of dealing things with anthropology. So the first is studies biocultural factors, second is it studies time and space, and third is it studies continuity and change. So if you can remember these three things, then you can automatically generate points. So now we deal with the biological theories of origin, that is what are the biological features in the human body that led to development of languages. So there are different kinds of hypotheses and theses being proposed here. The one is Lieberman-Lightman hypothesis, which says that when the L-shaped vocal trap developed, then the languages came into existence. Then there are other theories which says about Wernicke and Broca's areas development and the coming of the languages. Then there is another theory by Hughes who says that when humans started making tools, that led to the lateralization of their brain, and that led to the emergence of languages. Then there is another genetic based theory which says that when the FOXP2 gene appeared in the humans, then it came to languages. So biological theories of languages are based on anatomy changes, which is Lieberman-Laitman. That is how the anatomy changes led to. Then there is Swante, which leads to genetic changes. So this way there are different kinds of theories of biological theories, which we'll be taking up in detail in the chapter 7. Then there are social theories of origin. So mainly there are two social theories, which are imitation hypothesis and necessity hypothesis. So again they have many subcomponents. Like imitation hypothesis has, like you say like dog says bow bow pow pow, then you have explosion boom kind of sound. So this changes, these things led to development of new vocabulary. And similarly there is necessity hypothesis that says that due to certain circumstances they led to the emergence of vocabulary. For example, you he ho hypothesis, which says about when cooperation was needed, such voices was made, and that led to the development of vocabulary. So don't worry, we'll be taking up this and the details. I'm just giving you a broad introduction. so that you can see how these chapters which are often neglected are being asked in the exam, and then people feel that the how from where these things are coming. Then the next concept is of creolization. So what is creolization? It is the emergence of new language. How new language comes into existence. Like suppose Europeans are entering into an Asian continent and African continent, so they have their own English as a first language, but the locals will have a different language. So due to the interaction of this two languages, there often lead to formation of a mixed languages, which is often spoken by the local people. Though English would not be a proper example for Creoles, but you can understand that it's a kind of Creole. We'll be taking up a Creole which is being practiced in Melanesian places in detail later. Then there is another component of, because we are studying the changes, so also due to the globalization there is a lot of language loss which is going on. Some languages have went extinct, like the Bo language, which was the last language from the Andamanese group. Then the next topic what linguistic anthropology studies is the relationship between language and culture and thought. So this year this question was asked on Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and people are going berserk over this, like from where this was asked, this and that. But this is a very easy question. It's a part of chapter 7. So Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says that it's our language which determines our cultures and thought. So he's a strong linguist determinist, like the language is determining the culture and thought. But again, there is criticism by different scholars like Noam Chomsky and some other who will say that if such was the case, then the translation of things would have never been possible. Similarly, if language affected culture, then the culture has progressed so fast in the last 100 years, but the languages have not changed for the past 100 years. So this way, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is contradicted. Then another school in this is about ethnosemantics, which is like a contradictory to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, because it says that it is the culture that determines language. Sapir says that language determines your culture and thought, but ethnosemantics says that your culture determines your language and thought. For example, it studies the lexical content of a semantic domain, and so we'll be taking up this in the next slide itself. So let's. So what does this mean? So ethnosemantics. Then we have the study of use of language in the socio-cultural context. So what it studies is how the language is used based on the social status, gender and age difference, multilingualism, and code switching. So for example, there is a study by Lavov. He studies class aspiration. So he says that since the lower class and the higher class do not have any aspirations for class changes, their language is not much concerned about perfection. Whereas since the middle class want to rise in hierarchy, so they are more concerned about how perfectly or imperfectly they are using the language. Similarly, there is another study by Mary Haas who studied Japanese culture and found that female and male there use different words for certain things, like water has different words for female and male. Then there's another interesting study by Kamal Mishra. He studies code switching in Indian population. That is, he says when people who are having two different languages, mother languages, when they interact, so the culture which is considered inferior, they will start speaking language of the superior people. Like for example, if we are talking to a Britisher, then or if we are even talking within each other, then we will try to impose our superiority by speaking English language. So this way the code switching happens. So social cultural context also determines our use of language. Then next is the language behavior of different types. We know there are non-verbal communication and then can be verbal communication. So in the non-verbal communication, we studies basically five things: haptics, chronemics, proxemics, artifacts, in this way. And so in which I can tell you two case studies to get a basic idea, like how Edward Hall studied chronemics, that is a study of time behavior. For example, in certain cultures which have monochromatic time, that is like US, UK, they are advanced society, so they have monochromatic culture. They don't take time as a something as light phenomena. If they give time as 5 p.m., this is 5 p.m. They don't consider about whom they are meeting at 4:50 p.m. so that they can ignore them and proceed for their task at 5 p.m. Whereas if we see the Hopi cultures or some other cultures who have polychromatic time, so they won't focus more on the time element, rather they will focus more on the social relationship. Let's say if they have given someone time to meet at 5 p.m, but now they have met someone at 4:50 p.m who is very important. Let's say he is grandfather of the person, so he might go on to talk with him and discuss everything till 5:15 p.m, and he'll not worry about meeting the other person at 5 p.m. So they have more fluid concept of time based on the social relationship with whom they are discussing. Then there is another interesting study by Murphy on the artifacts, that is how the things are used while dealing with social relationships. Like he says that there are Tuaregs of sub-Saharan Africa, so they will not use their mask while dealing within the same class, within the same tribe. But when they're discussing with the enemy, they will never reveal their identity, and so mask is always put on. Right? So this way, how the scope of linguistic anthropology is studied in different types of behavior. Then the scope is also in terms of structural linguistic, that is, what are the rules that are followed while speaking or making sentences. Like for example, phonetics is there, so it studies how humans make and perceive sound. So you can see this diagram I have made, phonetic for phonetic symbols. So you have consonants as P, B and T here. You have vowels as I, J, E, O, U. These are the different vowels. So you see how these relationships are established based on the sound. That if you see how this cup is pronounced, so C-U-P. So this, there are different vowels which are being used to lead to that kind of structure, how it will be pronounced. That cup is like this, bird has this vowel and these consonants and it's pronounced like this. So this way it tells about how the humans organize their sound knowledge based on their rules which they have devised, right? Then also linguistic anthropology studies about the distribution of languages. For example, Grierson conducted survey of Indian languages and found so many languages and classified them into different groups. We'll be taking this in the detail in paper 2, unit 2. Then the next is, what are the methods and methodology used in linguistic anthropology. We have already discussed about what does methodology mean and what does method mean. So methodology means the basic idea someone is following while doing his or her research, and method is how the data collected is organized in a particular manner to reach the goals of methodology, right? So the methodology here is of structuralism by Levi Strauss, because he's a structural linguistic. So he did some field work in Brazilian society. Similarly, symbolic and interpretative anthropology is also based on linguistics. They also do fieldwork method. Like for example, he studied Balinese cockfight, and he gave the example of, we can, like only the native can give you, like if you're blinking your eyes or if you're twitching your eyes, only I can ask you to tell me whether you are blinking it or you're twitching it. I can never understand whether you're blinking it or twitching it. So this is also because someone's language only can give you this idea. Then we have cognitive anthropology. So this cognitive anthropology basically comes into existence because when Mead was conducting her fieldwork, it was found that the tribes have given her wrong information. The Samoans were giving her all the wrong informations. So the ethnography was differing a lot. Mead had a different kind of content, and the person who was criticizing Mead had a different ethnography from the same tribe. So it was found during the 1950s that these ethnographies are not again regeneratable in the same way. Like, so the information is being differing. So what cognitive anthropologists say, that let us devise a criteria where we can classify a culture based on some scheme which can never be changed, and the ethnography generated is reproducible. It will not change whether I do the fieldwork, you do the fieldwork, or some other do the fieldwork. That content of the culture will not change. So like for example, Conklin studied Hanunu for this. So he found that Hanunu had a different concept of identifying this plant categories and all color categories from US. Like US will have hue, saturation and these things, whereas Hanunu will have a different concept of colors. So we'll take up this while studying Conklin later. So this is only a brief overview to tell you that how we'll be covering different things in the different part of the culture and getting a basic idea for everything. Then the next is development of linguistic anthropology. So this is a very simple slide. You can see yourself and keep yourself for and write it for your note purpose. Then the next is the relevance of linguistic anthropology. So this is very important. So as we have seen, cultural relativism is a hallmark of anthropology. So as we see while studying the relationship between language, thought and culture in the scope, we found that society's culture is reflected in lexical content in the form of semantic domain. So this is a bit difficult to read it, but let's understand this through an example. So let's say semantic domain it means the set of words that belong to a particular class. For example, chair, table. These belong to a semantic domain of furniture, right? And the lexical content is chair and table. That is, what are the different kinds of furniture that culture understood, right? For example, in coastal communities, the fishes are a particular kind of semantic domain, right? It's a particular class of thing. But within that class of thing, there is a lot of variety, which is the lexical content. That is tuna, salmon, and many other things. So that shows that it's the culture that determines your language. So culture should be understood from its own perspective, and cultural relativism is important, right? Then the next is the tribal education policy, like Kaka committee report. It said about tribal languages must be used in the primary school and the curriculum and other things. Also, famous studies by the Gond education scheme by Heimendorf, which trained the Gondi speakers itself to teach the tribal people. So tribal teachers were teaching tribals. This was a very good development. Then another is preserving the languages which are going extinct. So like I have repeated many times, this Bo language has gone extinct. It was a language dating Neolithic times, and many initiatives have been taken to preserve this language. For example, a person from Arunachal Pradesh named Bangwang Losu has developed script for Vanchu language, and it has now being used even to teach the people, right? So even UN has declared 2019 as the year of indigenous languages to focus on endangered languages. So linguistic anthropology is very relevant for all these purposes, like for devising tribal education policy, for preserving languages going extinct, and for understanding cultures in their own context. So now we move on to archaeological anthropology. So archaeological anthropology is a sub branch of anthropology that is again the same thing, holistic reconstruction of past societies, and on the basis of material remains. That is, they'll find some artifacts, like there are tools, there are habitation patterns, there are fire hearths. On the basis of this, they will do a holistic reconstruction of the society. So what does it combines? It combines the diet patterns, combines the settlement patterns, the tools, and many other elements to provide the holistic view, right? So simply defining, it's a branch of sub branch of anthropology that deals with the holistic reconstruction of only past societies on the basis of material remains, right? On the basis of material remains, that is the most important thing. So then the next is development of archaeological anthropology. This is an important development. So Walter Taylor, an archaeologist, divided development of archaeology anthropology into two phases. So the first is the classic archaeology. It is descriptive in nature. It just collects a lot of material and says that this culture had this tool, this culture had this fire hut, this culture had this settlement pattern. It doesn't give any kind of theory or overall understanding of the context. Then it is comparative. It will compare two cultures. Like this culture had this tool, like Paleolithic had Acheulean tools, Mesolithic had microlithic tools, but it doesn't tell us the context and all the things why these cultures are this way. It's only comparing on a very random manner. So Boas was one of prominent archaeologists who collected a lot of data in this. Then came in the 1950s the new archaeology, or also known as ethnoarchaeology or the processual archaeology, right? So what this is very different because it's focused on theory building. It tries to collect all the data and tries to postulate theories that what could have been the situation, what led to this kind of development, right? So it's based on logical deductive approach. It's focusing some logical approach to reach some deductions. So, for example, Gordon Child's evolutionary schemes are there. R.B. Lee's study on Kong is there. Lewis Binford's Eskimo butchery practices is there, which tells about how the storage was being done by Eskimos. and how it tells about the social inequality also, why only some particular bands had this practice, why the other bands did not had practice, right? So this is how we study archaeological anthropology. So what are the branches of archaeology? The first is prehistoric. Prehistoric simply means that it studies the human past where there were no written records. For example, the Paleolithic culture. And historic means that the written records are now existing, like from the times of Ashoka we have Megasthenes and many other works by these writers and all. So this is how the branches of anthropology are classified, on the basis of whether the written records are available or not. So the next is again the methodology. The methodology is diffusion was used and neo evolution, and both were using fieldwork or ethnographic methods to give complete records. Also, since it's archaeology, so it will be using dating methods. It could be relative dating method like stratigraphy or absolute dating methods like carbon dating. So the next is the scope. So what is the scope? This was important because this is what we are focusing more on. So like reconstructing human culture, evolutionary stages, and socio-economic life. Like the stages are constructed like Paleolithic to Mesolithic to Neolithic on the basis of tools, pottery, harvesters. Like so, harvesters and pottery and coins were found in Burzaholm. That indicates that Neolithic had agriculture, right? So this is how we can understand the socio-economic life based on the material remains available. Then also about the evolution of dwellings, like Buza home had pit dwellings which had fire hearth in bottom. So it indicates the climate would have been cold in that time. That is why they were dwelling in pit and using fire hearths, right? Also, if you see the pottery, in some cultures pottery has a lot of designs, and the other cultures pottery is very simple. So that indicates that the culture with higher designs on the pottery is a much developed culture. So it will be following more social stratification, right? Also, settlement patterns reveal it. Like in Inamgaon, it is found that this chief had a different kind of house. He had a rectangular house, and the other people would have had circular houses, and they were living in the periphery. Whereas chief's hut was at the center, attached to the granary, and was in rectangular shape. So this difference in the shape and distribution of houses in that Inamgaon location shows that settlement patterns can reveal social stratification. And also we know that Robert Brucefoot, he developed the Paleolithic sites and the Madrasian cultures, right? He found out for the first time that lower Paleolithic existed in India while studying the Madras location. So, and Sakali also constructed a lot of stages we'll be covering in 1.8 unit. So then the next is scope is explaining cultural change. Like we have seen their focus on theory building. Like Gordon Child gives on the basis of revolutions, like Neolithic revolution lead to this stage, urban revolution lead to this stage. Similarly, Leslie White also gives his theory of cultural change based on the energy change, how much energy is being utilized by a culture, shows how we can understand how much evolved is the culture. Like for savagery, it was only human muscle energy which was used, so only hunting and gathering was there. Then in the barbarism, animal was also used. So agriculture and plant domestication was witnessed in this arena. So this is how it's showing how, as the energy trap increases, the culture evolves. So this can be understood from the archaeological material remains. Like if a culture is not showing these changes, like if the culture is not having agricultural tools, then it shows that this culture would have not reached the barbaric stage or civilization state. This is still lying in the savagery state. So this is how we can understand the cultural change. And finally, the relevance of anthropology to the present study behavior. So in the present society, we can see William Rathje. He is an American archaeologist. So he started Tucson Garbage Project. He found that he collected data, a lot of data from the Tucson residents to examine whether their patterns of consumption are in consonation with what they are saying. So he studied the quantitative data collected from the bins. He collected a lot of data from the bins, and he collected information from the people about their consumption. So he found that the people said like alcohol consumption was proven to be significantly higher in reality like because they would have found more beer cans or bottles like for alcohol when compared to what the people were telling them that we are not that much alcoholism. So it shows that people's self-reported and actual behaviors are very different. Also he found that like usually we will think that we will waste less food while in recession, but his landfill project found that when resources are scarce, people tend to buy larger quantities, and this leads to throwing up of more on the expiration dates. So this shows that the waste is more during the economic recession. So this is very counterintuitive to what we would have thought. So this is how archaeology is relevant in the present society's behavioral studies. So thank you friends for this, and in the next lecture we'll be starting with the topic 1.4, the biocultural factors in the human evolution. Thank you.